Hiya, I'm here to talk Bakugan. You see, as a kid, I used to collect these things, and still do till this day. Bakugan is a super cool toy line that combines toy figures with a card game, and my younger brother and I used to play it a lot. But when he moved out, he gave me all his Bakugan. Why did he do that? Because he knows I take care of my stuff. Both our collections combined makes for a lot of Bakugan.
That one's mine. That one's my brother's. That one's mine. That one's mine. That one's mine. That one's my brother's. That one's my brother's. That one's mine.
I'm making this video because I'm disappointed in how the new Bakugan, which people are calling Gen 3, is turning out. Why? Because I don't like the look of these Beyblade looking things. Now I will admit, the first reboot, the toys were pretty cool and more detailed than the 2007 toy line, even if they're more difficult to close now. But they had no reason to reboot the franchise again. But enough about the toys and how I think it's stupid and it's a piece of shit. As much as the toys changed, so did the anime. And I'm not talking about Bakugan Mectanium Surge and not Bakugan New Vestroya, but where it all began, Bakugan Battle Brawlers. So let's check it out, because this is a Bakugan Battle Brawlers retrospective.
Against the wall, gotta give it your all. This is the final stand. The power's in your hand. Two worlds collide on the inside. You gotta fight for what's right before it's gone, gone, gone. This is Bakugan.
First episode, we see Dan, the main character. He just got home from school, probably because he just set down his backpack. Oh, and his mom is like doing yoga or something. He grabs a few of his Bakugan before hopping on his bike, because he has a Bakugan brawl to attend with this fat guy named Shuji. They both bring out their gate cards, thus opening the battlefield, thus freezing the whole world in time. Or maybe it's just freezing the general area, I don't know. But as this was happening, Dan's dad got home from work, so he grabbed some pudding from the fridge, and look at this. He drops the pudding, and it looks all 3D-ish, and I thought that was kind of cool when I was a kid. For those of you who don't know Bakugan, here's how a brawl usually goes down. With two players throw down their gate cards. Once on the battlefield, the cards get huge. They throw down their Bakugan, and then the Bakugan gets huge, and then you got two giant monsters fighting each other. They do this until one of them wins all 3 rounds. But Dan ends up winning this one, because as he previously stated, he never loses. So Shuji faces defeat. Later that night, Dan is at home bragging about his victory to his friends. But back in the Bakugan world, Drago was face to face with a Bakugan called Naga. So they had a little chat before Naga opened up a portal to God knows where. Dan walked into Shuji again. Shuji wanted a rematch, so the battle begins. Meanwhile, Naga reaches the Infinity and Silent Core. But one of them sucked him up and something really bad happened. He triggered something that wasn't supposed to happen. All the Bakugan went crazy and one of them even attacked Drago. So during Dan's match, he winds up in the middle of Drago's fight. This is when Dan meets Drago for the first time. Drago gets transported to the battlefield that Dan was in. This is when Dan hears a Bakugan talking for the first time. It was Drago.
You must come to your senses.
Huh? What the? Who said that? Huh? Was it you?
Now keep in mind this is the first time anyone heard a Bakugan talk, and you should also know Dan and his friends invented the game of Bakugan, right? But if they called it Bakugan, how did they know that Bakugan was also the name of the monsters? There was no Bakugan to tell them they are called Bakugan. It makes no sense. So the match ends. Dan won. He goes home that night and he consists that his Bakugan was talking. Dan turns on his computer to tell his friends that his Bakugan talked. His friends informed him everyone heard their Bakugan talking too.
No way! You too?
What'd you mean, Runo? You saying someone else heard them too?
You should log on to the Bakugan site. It's what everyone's talking about, Dan. It spoke to me and everything.
I can't believe what happened to Runo.
That was awesome! What did you say?
It did talk! Maybe the Bakugan world has more to it than we thought.
That concludes the first episode. Next episode, which is titled Masquerade Ball, Runo, one of Dan's online friends, is at the park. She's complaining trying to get her Bakugan to talk like Dan's, when all of a sudden, a dude in a mask appears. This dude calls himself Masquerade, which is the name of the episode. Keep up. Masquerade challenges Runo to a brawl. However, we, the viewer, doesn't get to see the brawl play out. But it probably wasn't good, judging by Runo's scream of terror. Meanwhile, Dan is at school showing off his Dragonoid he named Drago in the previous episode. Try to keep up! But to Dan's annoyance, Drago says nothing. Teacher enters the classroom. I never went to school, but is this how kids react to a teacher walking into class?
Did you not hear the bell?
It's Miss Birdie!
So in the mix of all the students, Drago rolls off the desk. He gets kicked around. Dan tries to catch him, but in the end, he ends up in the hands of Miss Purdy. But it's okay, because later Dan gets him back, because now he's scrubbing him with a toothbrush. This is when Drago talks, but only to tell him to stop it.
Cease your scrubbing, human. I am not your toy.
Whoa, you scared the crud out of me! But I knew it, you can talk. Listen up, guys, he can talk. My Drago just talked to me, did you hear? He told me he isn't just some toy.
At home, Dan logs onto his computer and gets startled by Runo. She complains at him and tells him she lost a battle to some dude named Masquerade, and he stole her Bakugan. This is when they find out everyone is having the same experience with the guy. And of course, upon hearing this, Dan starts acting all tough and claims he's going to challenge Masquerade to a battle. So he sends Masquerade a video challenging him. He privately sent the video, or he posted it online and Masquerade just happened to see it. But if it was sent privately, it's never explained to us how Dan had his online address. The next day, assuming Masquerade will show up, Dan rushes to the place they scheduled to meet up. But instead of Masquerade being there, it was this fat guy again. So they battled. Nothing interesting here happens except Drago was being kinda stubborn about brawling. But after they leave,
I'm going home to Mommy!
Masquerade appears from the shadows. This battle shows how Masquerade actually steals Bakugan. He sends them to somewhere called the Dune Dimension, where they will never be seen again. Near the end of the match, Drago is fighting off a Bakugan called Ripper. For some reason, Drago was spared.
Could have captured your Bakugan, but I decided against.
Against? Why did he say it like that? Dan begged for a rematch as Masquerade walked away. But that's the end of episode 2. Okay, before we move on, a brief intermission. I just wanted to let you know I draw. And also, I make drawing videos. Everything I draw on YouTube shows up on my DeviantArt page. The link is below. And if you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe. Me and Drago would really appreciate it. Okay, back to the show. In A Feud Between Friends, the episode starts off with a kid named Ricky Maru battling another kid. After the match, he was annoyed no one is good enough to challenge him. So after defeating all the kids at the playground, he walked through the forest complaining how everyone is weak. All of a sudden, an Aqua's Bakugan was thrown at him. He took a look at it and noticed it came from Masquerade. Dan is at the park exercising. He's doing pull-ups, he's doing push-ups, and doing whatever this is.
I'm the man.
Ha! You're a boy.
Ah!
Now the half of the episode, it shows that Dan and Drago really don't seem to get along. They argue, they disagree, but later that night, as Dan was brushing Drago with a toothbrush again, Bruno says how Dan is so lucky that he's the only one with a talking Bakugan, even though at the end of the first episode they discovered everyone on the web was talking about their talking Bakugan. The show isn't very consistent. After a restless night, Dan is getting ready for school. As he was leaving, Drago actually called Dan by his name instead of human.
Listen, I gotta get going. Huh? Hey, you called me by my name.
I was thinking it would be better for the both of us if we worked together, as a team.
Now from here, Dan and Drago did everything together. They took a bath together, they sat at the dinner table together, they were really getting along. Later, Dan was at his computer again. Bruno came into the chat making this face.
Ta-da! Look, I got myself a talking Bakugan.
Greetings, human.
She has a talking Bakugan too. Chaos Tigrera. Julie looks so jealous. The next day, running across a bridge, Dan and Drago ran into Rikimaru. He wanted a battle. Drago told Dan to be careful, that he should, because moments later, Rikimaru pulled out a Doom card. Dan and Drago caught on that he's working for Masquerade. When the battle begins, Drago tells Dan he should wait before throwing down any more gate cards. But of course, he does it anyway. Dan rushes into things too quickly, ignoring Drago. This causes Drago to get upset with him, because Dan's strategy doesn't seem to work. This results in Dan losing 2 Bakugan. And by lose, I mean they go to the Doom Dimension never to be seen again. And with confidence, Dan throws Drago into the brawl.
This is not a game anymore!
Somehow, Drago won. Drago seemed upset about the Bakugan that were sent to the Doom Dimension, and he was mad at Dan's reckless actions. They weren't seen eye to eye. Dan tossed him into the river after this argument. Next episode, Dan and Drago, yes, that's the name of the episode. Dan is at his computer telling his friends he got rid of Drago. He seemed to be glad Drago was gone. However, later as the episode progresses, it becomes apparent things aren't going so well without him. Dan meets a kid named Ryo, who knows a lot about Bakugan but never played. Dan starts trash-talking the poor guy. Ryo trips and drops his computer. Dan runs off embarrassed. Later, Dan is at home lying on his bed thinking about Drago. Meanwhile, Masquerade communicates with Ryo through his computer. The next day, on the streets, Dan runs into Ryo again. Ryo challenges Dan. This is when Dan realizes he's under Masquerade's spell. They battle, but Dan lost a lot of Bakugan to the Doom Dimension. After his loss, he realized he really needed Drago. With regret, he ran down to the river where he left him. Before he got washed away, Dan finally found Drago. From then on, Dan and Drago swore that they would work as a team. Now, with Drago at his side, they faced off against Ryo later in the episode. There's this one part during the battle though. Ryo yelled ability card activate when he clearly said gate card down.
Here! Ability card activate!
And there's this confusing scene too.
Gate card open now! Bakugan, roll! Gate card set! Bakugan, roll! Bakugan, stand!
You don't say gate card set when you're throwing down a Bakugan. Near the end, Drago and Reaper were thrown into battle. Dan and Drago won, of course, and because this is a kid's show, Dan and Ryo becomes friends and he is no longer under Masquerade's spell. Masquerade is watching from a distance, hinting that his work is not done. In the episode Bruno Rules, Dan is on his computer talking with his friends when his mother walked in his room to tell him to go to the grocery store. Meanwhile, in the park, some kids were showing off their Bakugan when someone named Tatsuya started being an asshole.
What the? Hey, what'd you do that for?
After those kids ran off, Masquerade appears and challenges Tatsuya to a brawl. The battle itself is unimportant, so we'll skip ahead to Bruno. Bruno is at the restaurant that her parents own. Her mother suggests that she goes to the grocery store to pick up a few things. On their way to the store, Dan and Bruno ran into each other. They were surprised to finally meet in person. Turns out, they both live in the same area. After they parted ways, Bruno notices Dan dropped his Bakupod. When she picks it up, she sees he has a message from Masquerade. He wanted Dan to meet him at the river. Instead of telling Dan about this, Bruno decided she'll go in his place. When she arrived, she was confused because that's not Masquerade. It's the kid from earlier. Masquerade sent him there to battle Dan. Since she was already there, they opened the battlefield. And just as the field was opening, Dan caught up and entered the battlefield. When Dan heard of the mix-up, he wanted to battle Taisu himself, but Bruno begged him to let her fight instead. Dan obliged. The battle ended with Bruno's partner Bakugan Tigrera winning the last round. Later, as the sun was going down, Dan and Bruno celebrated by having a cookout together. The next episode really isn't that interesting. Dan and Bruno are at the fair and arguing what ride they should go on next. Drago and Tigrera are shown sticking out of their pockets. But look at Tigrera's nose. It should be white, but it's black for some reason. Anyway, they see a magic show. They were invited on stage, and they were asked to pick a card. When they do, they see it's a Doom card, which means these two musicians are working for Masquerade. They challenge Dan and Bruno to a combination battle, which is the name of this episode. This episode is just one big brawl. In it, Dan and Bruno learns teamwork. All in all, I'd say it's a pretty pointless episode. Also, I think these two dudes are twins. They never bring it up, but they're twins. In Bakugan Idol, Bruno is seen at Dan's computer chatting with their friends. Marucho comes in and announces his family is moving into Dan's neighborhood and how he's throwing a party and everyone's invited. This is the episode where we meet Prius, the funniest character in the whole show.
I have weapons. What? What are you doing? Put down that stick. Stop pushing me. Tuck and roll, tuck and roll. Ouch. That was a rock. Must resist sudden stop. Oh no, a truck. I can't see. I can't. Oh, it's a leaf.
Later, Dan and Bruno are in front of Marucho's house. He gives them a tour, as a good host should. A while later, they finally make it to this big room right here. Change the channel to a celebrity duo on TV, Jenny and Jules. While walking through the hallway, the three friends spotted Prius walking along. That's when Marucho meets his new future Bakugan. Later, Jenny and Jules are coming out of a limo when someone calls out to them.
Jenny and Jules, I am Masquerade. Over here to the right. Yes. No, that's your left. The other right. Would you ladies care for a little Bakugan action?
Later, Jenny and Jules challenges Dan and Marucho to a Bakugan brawl. They are psyched, until they learn the two pop stars are working for Masquerade. This battle takes place on the roof. Marucho came back with a Bakugan launcher for the two of them that his dad had at the factory. They look cool, but in real life, they don't seem to work very well. In this battle, we get to see what Prius looks like in monster form for the first time. This episode actually ends on a cliffhanger. The battle continues and girls just want to have fun. Not the song, it's the name of this episode. Nothing of interest happens here, except the discovery that Prius can actually change into any attribute during battle. They use this to their advantage somehow.
You're saying you want me to go in there and risk being sent to the Doom Dimension? Yes!
But I have to point out, there is no reason that Bruno couldn't come in the field and watch the battle play out. She was frozen in time with the rest of the world. But the good guys won, and like with all of Masquerade's lackeys, the spell worn off on Jenny and Jules, so they ran off because they had a show to do. But at the ending of the episode, we learned more about the Bakugan. At Marucho's house, all the friends got together, and while Drago explained how something called the Infinity Core got separated from the Silent Core and went into the human world. Someone known as Michael was behind this and corrupted the Bakugan they call Naga. As we saw in the first episode, the Bakugan planet, Vestroia, is colliding with the human world. Hearing all of this, Julie held up her science book to reveal Michael is on the cover. That's when they discovered that it's the same Michael that Drago was talking about. But as it turns out, Michael is actually the grandfather of one of the friends, Alice. Okay, quick break. Do you know that despite having a symbol on Bakugan in real life and on this poster, they don't have the symbol in the actual anime? In Fight or Flight, two boys are shown talking about Bakugan when they turn their heads over to see their friend Mew. But Mew is a little preoccupied thinking about her little brother. We'll soon find out later in the episode. Masquerade comes along and shows the three friends a couple of Doom cards. Meanwhile, Bruno and Marucho are at the airport to meet up with Alice. In this episode, we learn that Alice isn't a battle brawler, but she's really smart about Bakugan and knows a lot about them. Also, Dan is completely absent through the entire episode, because he's like lost or something. So while sitting on the bench, they were approached by the three friends from earlier. They revealed their Doom cards, challenging them to a battle. They all meet outside, even though they could have started the battle right where they were, because they're just gonna freeze time anyway. Okay, so the battle starts. As the battle progresses, more and more Bakugan were sent to the Doom Dimension. This upsets Mew, to the point where she cries. As it turns out, they were only doing this because Masquerade promised she would be reunited with her younger brother, if they won. They got separated when their parents split. The two friends called back their Doom cards and wanted to play the game for real. So after having a fair fight, they make it back to the airport. Meanwhile, Dan is sitting there when a little boy comes up to him to tell him how cool his talking Bakugan is, and how he's gonna meet up with his sister Mew. Later, the four main characters all meet up together. Happy ending. In a perfect match, Julie is battling her childhood friend Billy. Billy used his talking Bakugan Cycloid to win the match. After the fight, Billy brags about how him and Cycloid are an awesome team. This made Julie jealous, and as much as Julie says she doesn't mind not having a talking Bakugan, she really wanted one. So the next day, she went to Bakugan Valley, the place where Billy said he met Cycloid. However, after running away like this, she went home that night empty-handed. She sat on her bed and cried, but then she heard a voice talking to her. She held up her head and seen a Bakugan on her shelf. That's when she met her talking Bakugan, Goron. It's never explained how he got there. But the next day, Julie challenges Billy to a rematch. Goron and Cycloid duke it out, and in the end, Julie and Goron won. That night, Julie showed Goron off to her friends. That wraps up the episode, but while Julie was on video chat, I noticed the background of Alice's screen. It looked the same as it always did. And I'm bringing this up because the episode before this one is when Bruno and Marucho met Alice at the airport. And she didn't fly all the way over there just for one day. No, she planned on staying with Bruno. You could argue that episode 10 takes place before episode 9, but I say that the animators just forgot. In Grandpa's Got a Brand New Bakugan, the episode starts off with Dan, Bruno, and Marucho at the river, when Dan decided to take on one of Masquerade's lackeys. After Dan's victory, he passed out and was sent home. There, they discussed how they needed more numbers if they wanted to beat Masquerade. Bruno and Marucho suggested they team up with Dan's childhood friend, Shun, to increase their odds. Dan refused, but when Bruno and Marucho went upon themselves to go seek Shun out, they ran into Shun's grandfather, who told them to get lost. They got past him by opening the field when he attacked. They closed the field so he'll hit the floor. Outside, they saw Shun on the roof. They asked him to join their team, but he wasn't interested, so they were kicked out. However, Shun's partner Bakugan, Skyrus, talked him into it. So on their way back to the plane, Shun showed up and would consider their offer if they beat him in a brawl. But even 2-on-1, Shun still beat them. Tigurera and Preyas were knocked out in the end. Let's talk about Skyrus, Shun's partner Bakugan. This happens to be my first ever Bakugan. He's not all green like in the anime. Mine is white with green stripes. This is because it's a Pearl Bakugan. Depending on what attribute it is, it will have different color of stripes. Yes, I also have Ventus Storm Skyrus. Skyrus is evolution, but we'll talk about evolutions later in the video. In Bakugan's stall, we see Alice working in Runo's restaurant. While waiting tables, she was thinking of confessing to Runo that Michael, the man they were talking about in episode 8, is her grandfather. Alice herself keeps repeating this whenever she gets screen time to remind the audience that Michael is her grandfather. Anyway, Alice never gets the chance to tell anyone though. Dan is on his computer. He discovers Shun is ranked number 6. By the way, these people right here on screen, they will be important characters later in future episodes. They're not just random extras. It's here we learn Dan and Shun used to be childhood friends. They even invented the rules of Bakugan. But when Shun's mom got sick, he retired from the game. Then one day, Shun was visiting his mom in the hospital. She asked him to go get her purse because she wanted to give him a present. On his way, his grandfather called and told him that things are gonna change. This made Shun really mad. So Shun ran off so he could challenge Dan to a brawl. This battle seemed to go on for a long time, because Shun was stalling so he wouldn't have to face his grandfather. But when the battle ended, Dan got his dad to rush them to the hospital. When Shun showed up, she finally gave him his present. It was a Bakugan, Skyrus. This whole episode was just a backstory for Shun. It was a flashback showing what happened before the events of the first episode. Just for the shun of it, we have Bruno and Alice waiting tables at the cafe. I'm just calling it the cafe now because I realize it doesn't have a name. Dan is sitting at the table when Prius tells Dan everything that happened in the previous episode. Upon hearing this, he is not happy. He can't believe that they went behind his back to recruit Shun. So him and Bruno got in an argument. Marucho did his best to keep the peace.
Why can't we all just get along?
But in the end, the three of them took Marucho's jet to go talk to Shun again. When they got there, Bruno and Marucho were figuring out how to get past this wall. But Dan just climbed over. Thinking that this was safe, they did the same. But they fell in a trap. So Dan went on ahead and found Shun in the backyard. Dan soon discovered Shun is on Masquerade's side. Dan decided to take on two of them at once. The battle commences. Shun soon realized what the Doom Dimension really is. And after Masquerade sacrifices his own Bakugan, Ripper, to the Doom Dimension, Shun switches sides and attempts to beat Masquerade. Drago and Skyrus teams up together and defeats the Bakugan they call Hydronoid. After this match, Dan and Shun rekindles their friendship. This episode is titled The Story of Vestroia. The character Billy we saw in episode 10 arrived at a huge mansion. There we are introduced to Shanli, Julio, Combi, and Klaus. They are the top 10 players in the world, and they all received a letter telling them to be right here. But they soon discovered Masquerade sent out those invitations. He ordered them to take out Dan and the rest of the Battle Brawlers. The only reason they're obeying him is because they are under the influence by Naga. Later at Marucho's house, Alice confesses to her friends that guy they were talking about in episode 8 is her grandfather, Michael. According to her, Michael would disappear for mysterious reasons. To find out why, they went to his lab that was located in Moscow. Upon arriving, they split up to look for clues. That's when Prius jumped all around until he accidentally flipped on a switch, thus turning on a video of Michael. It was a video of him conducting his research. He explained how he was working on a transporter, but it broke and opened a portal to another world called Vestroia, full of these Bakugan creatures. He was sucked into this portal. That's where he met the Bakugan Naga. It took him 6 months to return to Earth, but this is how the Bakugan crossed over to the human world. Not as creatures, but as small, figures. The video cut out, but when it came back on screen was Hell G. Michael, turned into a green goblin for some reason. But when Marucho enhanced the footage, they could see Masquerade in the background. Naga is actually very interesting. Did you know he is actually considered to be a dragonoid? Another interesting thing is Naga has no attribute or faction. And this is the case as in real life. There is no symbol on his body. However, there does exist a Pyrus Naga for some reason. In Duel in the Desert, the gang flew to Bakugan Valley where they met up with Julie. They came here to find the Infinity Core. So after running away from bats, scorpions, and everything else, they found something. It took them to the Bakugan dimension. There they saw how Vestroia is falling apart. But soon after, the cave started collapsing. They all ran out just in time. But then suddenly, Billy and Kamba showed up. And for some reason, Kamba has the same voice as some random extra from episode 4.
Now what did you have to go and do that for? You probably broke his computer. Yeah, chumps. Let's see what you can do when you take on the best.
Billy revealed to them he's on Masquerade's side. Julie couldn't believe her childhood friend was on the dark side. Shun and Julie battled the two of them. In the end, Goram delivered the final blow, winning the brawl. Julie thought after they won, Billy would come around again, but he was still on the dark side. Julie was very upset about this. In no guts, no glory, Julie was still upset about what happened with Billy. But later, back at the jet, the gang got together and started wondering how Masquerade's crew keeps showing up wherever they are. That's when they figured there must be a spy among them, watching them wherever they go. They think it might be someone named Webmaster Joe. They expect that this person who was never brought up until this episode might be the spy. But apparently, this Joe person manages their website. They never met this guy before, they don't even know what he looks like. Their next stop is out by the canyons. There, one of Masquerade's henchmen spotted them, Chan Lee. I think it's cool before these characters were introduced in any episodes, they were shown on the ranking screen in episode 12. Anyway, Chan Lee challenged Dan. They fought, and that was that. Chan Lee seemed to have disappeared after the battle. This is when Dan and the gang realized it must be Webmaster Joe that is spying on them. The episode ends with this creepy scene.
Time to see what the Bakugan Battle Brawlers are up to.
In BFF, Best Friends Forever, this episode starts off by showing us what great friends Marucho and Preyas are. They watch cooking shows together, they cooked a meal for everyone together, they do everything together. So later Dan sends out a video message asking for anyone who knows the whereabouts of the Infinity Core. The next day, someone responded. The person who responded wanted the Battle Brawlers to come to them, but they live in Germany, so the whole gang flew to Germany. They came to this huge mansion. Inside, they met the person who responded to the message. It was Klaus von Herzen. Klaus had an eye on Preyas, so he challenged Marucho. But Marucho not only lost the battle, but he also lost his best friend Preyas to the Doom Dimension. Marucho was very upset, begging to bring him back. But Klaus ends up leaving through a portal. Marucho ran after him, and Runo ran after Marucho. The 4 remaining Battle Brawlers were left confused to where everyone went. Hey, do you know the difference between these 2 darkest Dragonoids? One's bigger than the other. That's because when Bakugan first came out, they were smaller, but not long after, they released the same Bakugan but made them bigger size. Evolution, revolution. Runo and Marucho woke up in a strange place since they were separated from the group. Dan and Runo communicated via Bakupod. I gotta say, Drago has no detail in this scene. Also, I think there's an animation error here. A part of Alice's blouse is the same color of her skin, even though it's supposed to be green. Runo and Marucho came to this strange room. This is where Masquerade appears. Marucho challenged Masquerade to get revenge for Preyas. But Julio showed up and challenged them instead. All of them opened the battlefield, including Dan. Despite them being separated as the field was opening, Dan joined their game. This is the only episode that Dan actually uses his goggles. After winning the match, as the field was closing, Dan grabbed Runo and Marucho, thus pulling them back to the other Battle Brawlers. Happy ending. But the next episode, Julie plays Hard Brawl. The whole gang found a nice spot to stop and eat. During their meal, Dan was giving Marucho a hard time despite him still being upset over the loss of Preyas. This causes him to run off. Runo told Dan to leave him alone, but Dan was only worried about beating Masquerade. Dan said Marucho needed to get over it, and Julie agreed. Runo lost her temper and told them to go away. Shun and Alice, yeah, they were just there. Also, Runo yelled and this made Alice leave. So I guess she was feeling extra bitchy this episode. So while walking in the forest, Julie had an idea where Billy might have went, and he showed up right where they were. Long story short, a brawl ensues. Towards the end, Billy caught on an attack. This would result in Goran being sent to the Doom Dimension. With Julie on his shoulder, Billy caught it off when he was reminded of their childhood bond. This whole thing was being carried out by Masquerade. In a little help from my friends, Dan and Runo were having another argument. This made Shun leave the jet. Dan tried to stop him. Alice went after him instead. But Shun was convinced he could beat Masquerade by himself. Suddenly, Kamba showed up challenging Shun. Kamba lost, of course. After this, Dan showed up begging Shun to come back. And after seeing how pathetic Kamba is alone, he accepted Dan's apology. Here's an interesting fact. Heiha's Bakugan are gray in real life instead of being white like in the anime. They wouldn't correct this detail until the reboot in 2018. In My Good Friend, the three enemy brawlers, Klaus, Chun-Li, and Julio, who are working for Masquerade, are planning their next attack since Billy and Kamba turned to the good side. So when the gang was dropping Kamba back at home, the three brawlers I mentioned before showed up and challenged them. This battle was 3-on-3. They discovered Klaus was in possession of Preyas when he threw him into battle. Somehow, Dan and Runo used some kind of ability to bring him back to the good side. And just like that, Preyas belonged to Marucho again. This battle ends on a cliffhanger. So, next episode. Oh, and Dan and Runo are arguing again. I just had to mention that. This continues and Drago's on fire. At the end of it, Dan and the others use an ability that really levels up Drago. He became so powerful in this battle, he evolved into Delta Dragonoid. And Dan acts like he doesn't know what a Dragonoid is.
Pirates, Delta, Dragonoid!
He could have said it like Delta Dragonoid, but no, he said Dragonoid, as if this is new information to him. Anyway, Drago looks different from his previous form. The bad guys gets their butts kicked, yada yada yada. But when things get interesting is when Shun asks them if they know who is Webmaster Joe. And turns out, he's a sick kid who's in the hospital, or at least that's what Chun-Li told them. The next episode, Say It Ain't So Joe, the Battle Brawlers fly to Cure City to find Joe at the hospital. After asking the lady at the counter what room he's in, and after Dan gets separated from Drago because he fell out of Dan's pocket, his friends found not Joe, but Joe's mom. But meanwhile, Dan was looking for Drago. A boy happened to pick him up. He approached Dan and gave Drago back to him. The boy turned out to be Joe. Him and Dan went to the roof of the hospital. Dan started asking him a bunch of questions, and the only way he'll answer anything is if Dan battles him. After a few rounds of Bakugan, Joe dies. Well, not really. But wouldn't that be fun though? He actually passes out. He was rushed to the emergency room, but the next day he was fine. Everyone found out he wasn't in cahoots with Masquerade at all. Marucho even found a video on his website warning Bakugan players not to battle Masquerade. Joe was one of the good guys. This is when Joe told the Brawlers all about his dream. In his dream, he met a Bakugan called Waver, and the Infinity Core happens to be inside her. Drago points out that Waver is Naga's twin sister. The secret of success. We have a kid named Christopher battling an older boy named Travis. Christopher lost the match and felt bad. Meanwhile, Runo was taking care of things at the cafe because Alice was off doing errands. While doing so, she glanced over and spotted a young boy at the river. Noticing how he was about to throw his Bakugan in it, she ran over in an attempt to stop him, but she ended up knocking him into the water. Later they sat and she helped him dry off. While there, Christopher complained about how he is sick of losing to his neighborhood bully Travis and says he's done with Bakugan. Alice being Alice, she encouraged the boy to keep trying. And after looking at his deck, she encouraged him to challenge Travis again, and she would even coach him through it. But when the battle started, everything froze in time as it should, except for Alice. She was not frozen and she did not follow them into the field like she should have. This whole thing of her existing outside of the field without being frozen is an occurrence that never happens again. Even still, Alice and Christopher were able to communicate like this. During the battle, his Bakugan, Dragonoid, talked to him and helped him through it too. In the end, Christopher won, but him and Travis became friends. In the episode Trust Me, Runo is shown keeping an eye on Alice while they're working at the cafe. Meanwhile, Dan, Marucho, and Julie were at the park trying to get random kids to battle them. Long story short, they all ran away. But suddenly, Julie spots Shun in the distance. When she pointed that out, Dan said that's impossible. He's not even in town. Later, Dan showed up hungry at the cafe.
Hey, where's Marucho and Julie?
I think they're afraid to eat here because your food gives them gas.
That's impossible! We only use organic ingredients!
When Alice went out, Bruno talked to Dan about how Alice could potentially be a spy for Masquerade. Meanwhile, Jolie told Marucho Shun might be a spy for Masquerade. So while Dan and Bruno were walking through town, Alice overheard them talking about how they think she's the spy. Suddenly, they bumped into Chuji and his brother, the two from the first episode. But this time, they brought their younger sister along, Mimi. They were challenged to brawl by the three of them. While they opened the field, Alice jumped in. While this was going down, Jolie challenged Shun to a battle under the assumption he's a spy. Meanwhile, in the other battle, Alice was trying to convince them she's not a spy by helping them win the battle. And after a speech about how she's proud to be a battle brawler despite her not even having a Bakugan, she suggests a move to help them win the brawl. Bruno used the move, and then Alice regained their trust. Oh yeah, and Skyrus told Jolie that Shun isn't a spy. He was in town for something else. At the end of the day, Marucho found something interesting. Not the spy, but that someone hacked their files from a remote location. In Doom Dimension or Bust, Masquerade is shown defeating all of his former teammates and sending their Bakugan to the Doom Dimension. Meanwhile, Bruno decided to quit playing Bakugan in fear of losing any more of them. But while having a conversation with Tigrera later, she heard a knock at her window. It was Dan.
I can't believe you just threw me!
Hey, relax, Drago. How else was I supposed to get her attention?
He threw her an energy drink, and before he ran off, he told her it's okay if she doesn't want to play Bakugan anymore. But at the end of the episode, she told all of her friends she's back to playing Bakugan. Pretty underwhelming episode. Hey guys, thanks for making it this far in the video. Now you guys are going to see me unbox some Bakugan, the Deku Dragonoid and the little one. Check it out. In Showdown, Marucho and Julie were at a jewelry store. As Julie was looking around, Marucho pointed at Dan. They were surprised to see him there. They noticed how he was purchasing a necklace. Julie assumed he was buying it for Bruno. So as Julie and Marucho followed him outside, they bumped into Joe. Later at the cafe, he explained how he's been released from the hospital, but he also came with bad news. He told the group Masquerade took all of his former sidekicks out. All of their Bakugan were sent to the Doom Dimension. Meanwhile, Shun was at his dojo watching a video message from Kamba. Masquerade got to him too. During the night, Dan was having a dream. Masquerade was there. Dan challenged him, but Masquerade threw a card at him. After that, Dan woke up. But when he looked down at the floor, the card was there, meaning it wasn't a dream. Next morning before Dan left, he gave his mom something for her birthday. It was the necklace. Later that day, all of the Brawlers got together and met Masquerade at the dock. This is when Dan and Drago fought Masquerade. But unfortunately for them, Masquerade's Bakugan Hydronoid has evolved into Dual Hydronoid. Dan and Drago put up a good fight, but in the end, they weren't powerful enough. Hydronoid had finished off Drago. He was sucked into the Doom Dimension. Dan came running after him, so when the field closed, Dan and Drago were nowhere to be found. In the Brawler's Last Stand, Drago is shown entering the Doom Dimension. There, he met his former enemy, Ripper, the Bakugan that belonged to Masquerade. But not long after, he spotted Dan. Meanwhile, Shun wakes up to a letter. It was a note from Masquerade. It said to meet him at the abandoned factory at 4 o'clock. Later that day, Dan's mother came by the cafe asking to speak to Runo. They walked to the park together. There, she asked about her son. Runo didn't have the heart to tell her what really happened, so she ran away crying. As the group was planning their next move, Skyrus told the other Bakugan to follow her. She had something to tell them. She told them how Shun was planning on losing to Masquerade on purpose, so he'll be sent to the Doom Dimension to look for Dan. Then they found a roller skate and crashed into something. So later the group had to find their missing Bakugan, and they found out about Shun's plan. They all decided they'll go together. So later in the episode, they ended up finding Masquerade. Dan's mom found them as they were opening the field, and when it closed, everyone was gone except for Masquerade. Before the episode ends, friends. The Brawlers are shown in the Doom Dimension, but they are being watched by someone. Nightmare in Doomsville. The Battle Brawlers found themselves in the Doom Dimension. There they saw Dan and Drago coming their way. Suddenly they were met with the 6 soldiers of Vestroia. They were there to see if the Battle Brawlers were worthy enough to save Vestroia, so they would put them to the test. But Dan and his friends would only accept if every Bakugan that's ever been sent to the Doom Dimension would be released. The soldiers agreed. So for the next 5 episodes, each of the Battle Brawlers will be tested. In Julie's test, she would have to battle her older sister. Even though this isn't her real sister and just an illusion, the lesson was still there. For her whole life, she lived in her sister's shadow. Her sister was better in every way, and because of this, Julie lacked confidence. But at the end of the battle, Julie had enough confidence to win, thus causing Gorham to evolve into Hammer Gorham. But in Marucho's test, he had to battle himself. This wasn't just a clone, it was a version of who he used to be. You see, Marucho grew up in a high-class household. His parents had high expectations for him, so he always did his homework and he was a well-behaved kid. But he wasn't comfortable with the person he used to be. His test was to come to terms with that. When he finally does, Preyas didn't evolve, but instead he was given 2 new Bakugan that shared Preyas' likeness, Angelo and Diablo. Shun's test, he found himself in a place where the sun never sets. He finds a little girl that resembles his mom when she was young, and he had to battle her. Shun has always been a loner, so when he realized that he needed his friends, Skyrus evolved into Storm Skyrus. In Runo's test, she had to battle a little boy, a boy that she met as a child. She didn't know at the time, but this boy happened to be Dan. Tigrera evolved into Blade Tigrera when Runo learned not to be so stubborn anymore. Now for Dan's test, he battles a clown, and after a few matches, it finally throws Polynir into battle. Polynir is the most powerful Dragonoid there is, and he is one of the 6 soldiers of Vestroia. Him and Drago face off against each other. I think the lesson here is that there's no greater bond than the one between human and Bakugan, because at the end of this, Dan and Drago wins. They soon realize Drago has not evolved yet. That's when it's revealed that they must battle their friends in order to make it to the next evolution. So now for this segment, if you made it this far, you get to see me unbox the most recent Bakugan, Nelius and Diamond Nelius.
This is the final stand. The power's in your hand. 2 worlds collide on the inside. You gotta fight for what's right before it's gone.
Okay, here we go. Next is Diamond Nelius. This is a special kind of Nelius. That was the unboxing of the 2 Neliuses, so let's get back to the show. In Home Sweet Home, Dan and Drago wakes up to find themselves back on Earth. Shortly after waking, he sees his friends running up towards him. Dan didn't have the guts to tell them Drago hasn't evolved yet. Meanwhile, Joe and Masquerade meets up with each other. Now that Joe has Wyvern, who is Naga's sister, he decided to take Masquerade on. Masquerade wanted to see if Wyvern was the ultimate Bakugan, so him and Hydronoid attempted to snatch the Infinity Core from her. But instead, him and Hydronoid actually lost. Later throughout the episode, Runo returns home to the cafe, the rest of the gang returns home, and Dan made it home to his mom, and he finally tells her about the Bakugan and how their planet's in danger. Dan's last stand. 4 of the Battle Brawlers were talking to Joe at the park. This is when Joe showed off Wyvern to everybody. Dan wanted Drago to meet Wyvern, but it turns out that they already knew each other. Not only that, but they were once a couple. Joe also mentioned that he battled Masquerade and won. They couldn't believe it. Later, Dan and others were on a walk talking about how all their Bakugan had evolved. This made Dan feel bad, so he confessed that Drago didn't really evolve. He also told them he needs to battle all 5 of his friends in order to do so. His first match was against Julie. I would like to point out that this battle was only Drago and Gorham. They didn't use any other of their Bakugan, because it was at this point in the show, they stopped playing by the rules and only used their partner Bakugan for every battle. What made Bakugan so fun was that they played the game as you would play in real life. The show went by the real-life rules, but ever since episode 35, it wasn't a game of Bakugan anymore, it was monster fighting monster. So after battling Jolie, he now had to battle Marucho. And after beating Marucho, it was Shun's turn, but Shun told him it would have to wait. Meanwhile, Masquerade was wandering through the Doom Dimension. He was there for his test so Hydronoid would evolve, but his tests would be battling Alice. In Show Me What You Got, Dan woke up on the day of his brawl with Shun. They were supposed to meet up sometime today, but Drago had plans first, so he went off on his own. Dan was at the cafe with Runo. He informed him that Alice was missing. She also noted that Alice goes missing a lot, but this time she hasn't come back yet. That's when Dan told her he needs to fight all the Brawlers in order to make Drago evolve. Meanwhile, Drago went to the park. He was meeting Wyvern there to catch up. They were reminiscing about the first time they met, and Naga was there. Wyvern and her brother Naga were a species of Bakugan called the White Ones, a mutated Bakugan with no attribute. That was the motive to take the Infinity Core and the Silent Core. After their chat, Drago rushed to the spot where the brawl was supposed to go down, but instead, Tigrera was there. She wanted to battle him before Shun and Skyrus could. He accepted, so Dan and Runo battled it out. Drago defeated Blade Tigrera. And yeah, Masquerade was still in the Doom Dimension doing his thing. You Say You Want an Evolution is the name of this episode. It was finally Shun's turn to face Dan in battle, and everyone was here to see it. Julie, Marucho, Rudo, and hey, here comes Joe. So Drago and Skyrus were battling. They were flying in the sky and hitting each other. It was awesome, but there was a moment where it seemed like Dan had lost. All his friends were telling him to get up, even Shun. He wanted Dan to put up a good fight. The fate of Destroya was in his hands. Drago needed to evolve, and when all seemed lost, he got up. Yay. And then they bumped into each other and Skyrus got knocked out. Dan and Drago had won, and the evolution started happening. Drago has evolved for the final time this season. Shun walked up to Dan and gave him a firm handshake. But meanwhile, Masquerade finally beaten Alice. Don't worry, it's not the real Alice. It's just a mirage. This made Hydronoid evolve. And behind the mask of Masquerade... doesn't the title sort of give it away? Alice is shown walking through fog until she reaches the city. Shortly after, she hears Runo calling for her. Runo has been wondering where she'd been, but Alice wasn't feeling well. So Runo took her back to her place. Meanwhile, everyone's at Dan's house looking on TV. The news was talking about all the strange weather conditions happening all over the world. This is because of what's happening in Destroya. Joe got a video message from Masquerade. Because Wyvern was in possession of the Infinity Core, he told Joe to meet him at a place called Dome Stadium. But instead of Joe showing up, Dan and his friends went instead. But since Drago is the ultimate Dragonoid now, Dan would be battling. This episode was pretty much the final showdown between Dan and Masquerade. Through the battle, they kept getting a tie, so they kept throwing in their Bakugan over and over until one of them wins. On the third round, Masquerade got really pissed off, but Dan finally won, and after all that, Dan asked him if he would be a part of their team to help them beat Naga. Masquerade wanted to accept, but instead, he removed his mask.
What the?
I don't believe it!
Alice!
It ends on a cliffhanger, and how annoying is that? Hey everyone, I'm going to unbox this Dragonoid.
What are you gonna do? The odds are stacked against you. Back against the wall, gotta give it your all.
Ability card as Dragonoid. This we call Gate card. And here we have the feet and the Dragonoid. Look at them. Close-up shots of Dragonoid. Everyone, including Alice, was shocked that she was Masquerade. So how G, aka Michael, appears and explained everything. When the Brawlers visited Michael's lab in episode 14, they discovered a video of Michael telling what he saw on the Bakugan planet. But the footage cut out before he was finished. That's because Alice walked in the room. But at that moment, Naga was attempting to take the Infinity Core and the Silent Core, and this created something called a Dimension of Nova. This made all the Bakugan go mad like we seen in the first episode. So I guess it crossed over through his transporter and contaminated the lab. This turned Michael into LG and turned Alice into Masquerade. And I guess Masquerade took on a life of his own. At this point, we were getting a lot of flashbacks, but they changed the dialogue in this one flashback. I don't know why. Take a listen.
Oh, Alice? What is it, Alice? Oh, it's okay. I'm fine. I guess I'm just a little tired today. Alice! What's the matter? You okay? Yeah, sure. I'm okay. I just had a little dizzy spell, that's all.
Well, anyway, Alice was feeling really bad for being the asshole that is Masquerade, so she decided to leave her friends. So LG left and took Alice with him. The Brawlers tried to make her stay, but she was gone. Later in the episode, all their parents got together and decided to tell the media about Bakugan and their planet Vestroia. Naga was adamant about getting the Infinity Core from Wyvern, so he created a huge hole in the ocean one night. The news was even covering it, but Dan and his friends realized that hole led to Vestroia, meaning the Bakugan world and their world were connected. So all of them went in Marucho's private jet and jumped into it to find Naga. And Alice gets schooled. It's revealed to us that Alice ran away to live with her aunt and uncle. She wanted nothing to do with Bakugan anymore. As she was wandering around, she noticed a castle in the distance. This happened to be the home of Klaus von Herzen. It's been a while since we've seen him, so she paid him a visit and told him everything. After learning that she was Masquerade all along, he wanted revenge, so he forced her to battle him. She did not want to do this. Oh, and she has the ability to see Bakugan's G-power, but it never gets brought up again. Anyway, at some point in the brawl, Alice and Klaus gets a glimpse of what's happening on Earth. They saw the Battle Brawlers head to Vestroia. This made Alice wish she was there with them. After the brawl had ended, she decided she needed to help her friends save the world from Naga. I have reviewed 40 episodes and there's only 12 more to go, but before that, we need to unbox this Dragonoid. Here, the ability card and character card. It's a collector's coin. God, look at his horn. Look at his eyes. Look like they poked him with green marker and called it a day. For the next 5 episodes, the Battle Brawlers would be traveling through Vestroia in search of Naga. In a fish called Tegan, they discovered Vestroia isn't what it used to be. Vestroia was now separated into multiple dimensions, and they have to pass through them all in order to get to Naga. In the first dimension, they met 2 Bakugan there. They call themselves the Gatekeepers. Long story short, Marucho gets stuck in a battle, but the others couldn't stick around for long, so Shun stayed to help while the others traveled through the next dimension. We continue in the race to Vestroia. They found 2 more Bakugan, sisters in fact, and they wanted Dan, Bruno, and Julie to play with them. But the Brawlers insisted they have to leave, but the sisters weren't gonna take no for an answer. So they had a race. If they could win, they could leave. So when they won, one of the sisters gave Dan a key. This allowed them to go to the next dimension. So they opened the gate. Bruno and Julie were left behind. Now it was Dan and Drago. In the story of Vestroia, they found themselves confronted by 2 more gatekeepers who were working for Naga. They almost got blasted, but someone saved them just in time. It was a Bakugan known as Noble Lion, the oldest and wisest of all the Bakugan. He tried to help Dan and Drago fight off the gatekeepers, but he died. So Dan and Drago attempted to continue the battle and get revenge for Noble Lion, but they couldn't do it alone. This whole scene continues in the next episode. It's a long shot. Somewhere, somehow, Alice heard Dan's cries for help. So her masquerade mask appears and she knew what she had to do. She went on Klaus's jet and jumped in Vestroia. Dan and Drago were about to give up, but then out came Masquerade and Hydronoid. This is when Dan and Masquerade finally worked as a team together. In order to psych out their enemies, Masquerade pretended to fall in the lava, leaving Dan to run for his life. But don't worry, they won in the end. But when they finally did beat them, Dan wanted Masquerade to help them beat Naga, but he couldn't. He had to say goodbye to Dan and Alice. He gave Alice Hydronoid. He was her Bakugan now. And like that, Masquerade was no more. Shortly after, the rest of the Battle Brawlers showed up. With the whole gang back together now, they were ready to defeat Naga.
Okay, now I'm going to unbox Diamond High Dress. Here is it's the action card. Close-up shots of Diamond High Dress. Yeah.
In ground control to Major Dan, the Battle Brawlers are at a loss. They don't know where Naga is, but Dan got a video call from Joe. That's because while they were gone, something was happening on Earth. How G was there. He summoned all the Bakugan from Vestroia into their world. And then Naga came. Everyone tried to take out all these Bakugan. Planes even tried attacking. But when that didn't work, Joe went on the internet and called any brawler he could. So a bunch of kids, including characters from past episodes, tried to help. But it was a losing battle. Wyvern started to shake in pain because Naga was close. So everyone knew their only hope was to call in the Battle Brawlers. So Dan got the video call telling them that the world's been taken over by Naga's army. So the 6 of them were on their way back to Earth. So for the next 4 episodes, it's going to be a Marucho episode, Julie episode, an Alice episode, and then a Shun episode. The first of the 4, the one-hit wonders, the Battle Brawlers finally landed on Earth. They found that Waddington isn't what it used to be. Also, I went through 45 episodes, and this is the first time they even mentioned the city's name. Everyone was at Waddington Tower. Wyvern had put a force field keeping any evil Bakugan out. But they soon discovered every Bakugan they passed through during their time in Vestroia has arrived in the city. So they decided to split up and take on each of those Bakugan. Later, we see Jenny and Jules had made a return. They team up with Marucho later to battle Bakugan called Dagon from the other episode. But she dies at the end. The episode after this, here's Mud in Your Eye. The Bakugan named Tricloid from episode 42 is making a sandcastle. When Naga approaches, he promises her if she destroys the Battle Brawlers, she'll be reunited with her sister Rebooter. Later, Julie and Billy teams up together. But they find Nami there. She accuses them of being in love. Then the 3 of them takes on Tricloid. As it turns out, Tricloid wasn't a bad Bakugan. She was only following Naga's orders to see her sister again. When she realizes Naga is a liar, she's like, okay, sorry, I gotta go find my sister. And later, Julie and Billy became an item or whatever. And R is for revenge. Tricloid's sister Rebooter is destroying the city. So Christopher came running ahead to stop her. Alice is here too. They fought Rebooter, but meanwhile, Drago and Wyvern were on top of Waddington Tower. There, Wyvern told him he must take the Infinity Core from her before Naga gets the chance. So the rest of the episode, Christopher and Alice are in a brawl. Klaus shows up in just a nick of time. Somehow later, Tricloid shows up and the sisters are reunited. Showdown in Waddington is the name of this episode. Kamba is here. Shun is here. They team up to fight this evil Bakugan whose name is Harity. I don't know if that matters at this point. And when things seem bleak, Julio shows up. In the end, Skyrus finishes the job and Harity dies, apparently. Moving on. The 50th episode, The Good, the Bad, and the Bakugan. At this point, everyone had fled the city. Only the Brawlers are left. At the beginning of this one, Dan and Runo discovered Drewman and Santero are here. They're the ones who Dan and Drago had fought when they teamed up with Masquerade the other episode. Drago and Tigrera were thrown in. Meanwhile, Marucho and the others all got a video call from Kato. Rucho's butler. The odd thing was they couldn't see him, only hear him. He told them Dan and Rune are in trouble and they should go to the park to help. Shun, Kamba, and Julio got the same message from him. But as it turns out, it wasn't Kato at all. OG was using a telephone booth to connect with them and disguise his voice. This is when Alice went looking for her grandfather Michael. She found him when OG transformed back into Michael. So Alice thought if she could bring Michael to the Infinity Core, that could help him keep OG at bay, I guess. So she brought him to Worthington Tower where Wyvern was. Meanwhile, Dan and Runo were still fighting Naga's minions when all the other brawlers came. All of them threw in their Bakugan, and before they knew it, Drewman and Zentaro were outnumbered. But at Worthington Tower, Wyvern sensed that Naga was near. This is when all the kids discovered they were tricked into leaving Wyvern alone when Rucho spoke to Kato, the actual Kato, who says he never caught anyone. So Michael transformed back to Helgi, and then threw Naga in. Alice was also tricked into bringing Michael to the Infinity Core. Back at the park, everyone looked over at Worthington Tower. Saw Naga and Wyvern were finally face to face. Okay, you know how in the Bakugan video game, there's a Bakugan called Leonidas? They actually made a Leonidas! This pack comes with a Leonidas. Right there.
One eternity later.
Done! God! Comes with a gate card and 2 character cards. 2? Should it come with 3? Oh yeah. 3 character cards. And this is Leonidas. This is the famous Leonidas. Awesome. In the final brawl, everyone was doing what they could to protect Wyvern in the Infinity Core. Even Shanli was going up against Naga. But meanwhile, Dan and the others were still battling Drewman and Centauro. Once they took out Centauro, Higura pinned Drewman down and told Drago to go protect Wyvern. Just when Naga was about to sink his claws into his sister, Dan and Drago came to the rescue. But while that was happening, Drewman was still causing the others trouble. So Tigrera made her attack, and Drewman blew up. Afterwards, she had this to say.
Good will always defeat evil.
So Drago and Wyvern talked about this. He knew what to do. Drago threw a fireball. It looked like it was coming towards Naga, but instead it struck Wyvern. By doing this, Drago was able to gain the Infinity Core. Wyvern wanted him to do this so Naga wouldn't be able to. Joe was upset, because without the Infinity Core, Wyvern faded into nothing. And with Wyvern gone now, Naga was after Drago. Somehow they picked up a part of the city and it was floating in the sky. As this was happening, Dan ran ahead and managed to follow Drago into the flying city. So this was a battle between Dan and Drago and LG and Naga. But LG decided to play dirty and had a bunch of enemy soldiers attack Drago. With all of them ganging up on him, it looked like Drago was done for. Okay, this is the climax of the whole show. So the next episode, Game Over, Drago was getting destroyed by the soldiers that LG summoned. And the news was even getting in on it. This was going live. When the reporter attempted to get closer to the action, they discovered there was a force field surrounding the floating city. No one could get in or out, except for Bakugan. That's when all 5 of Dan's teammates decided to throw their Bakugan in. As Drago was laying in defeat, Hydronoid appeared at his side, then Preus, Angelo and Diablo, Gorum, Skyrus, Tigrera all came to help Drago. With their combined strength, Naga was defeated and the Silent Core was released from him, meaning Drago now held the Infinity Core and the Silent Core. Once the fight was over, Dan came running towards his friends. Then Michael showed up, Alice's grandfather. It seemed he was no longer LG. Everything was back to normal, right? Well, no. Vestroia and Earth were still merging with each other. In order to set things right, Drago must travel to the center of Vestroia and put the 2 cores back where they belong. But the Brawlers realize Drago is a new core of Vestroia, meaning he won't be coming back. All of the Bakugan actually needs to return home to their world. So Drago opened the portal to Vestroia while they say their final goodbyes. Bruno said goodbye to Tigrera, Julie kissed Gorum goodbye, Marucho parted ways with his 3 Bakugan, Preus, Angelo, and Diablo, Shun said goodbye to Skyrus, Alice Hydronoid said goodbye to each other, and Dan said goodbye to Drago. Then they all threw their Bakugan one last time into the portal. Once they made it through, Drago parted ways with the other Bakugan, because he needed to restore the balance of the 2 worlds. Then Wyvern appears to him. Drago and her goes to the center of Vestroia so they could be together, and the universe was in perfect balance. The other Bakugan returned home, all of the Bakugan, and that was the end of the Bakugan Battle Brawlers. Except for this last scene. Dan is shown coming home before leaving again like he did in the first episode. He gets on his bike and rides down to the park. Who is he meeting there? Well, Runo. She's all dolled up, she's wearing a dress, her hair is down. So her and Dan runs off holding hands, before facing the viewer and giving us a smile. And that was the end of the Bakugan Battle Brawlers. This was a good show, only if they would have ended it there. But later, Bakugan New Vestroia was released with all new Bakugan. Thing that always bothered me about the anime is with every new season, they kept replacing old characters with new ones. Bruno, Julie, and Alice were still somewhat a part of the show, but absent from most of it. They were replaced in favor of new characters. I mean, yeah, I get it. Shows like this usually introduce new characters, but why replace characters who were basically a part of the main cast? But after Bakugan New Vestroia, there was Bakugan Kandalian Invaders, then Bakugan Mectanium Surge. With all these new installments in the series, they introduced Trap Bakugan, which are basically just different shaped Bakugan. There's Battle Gear and Battle Suits, but that's only to name a few. But then Bakugan kinda died off, then the reboot happened. And the toys were very cool, I gotta admit. But the anime, there was no in-depth story like in the original. There was no character developed. Okay, the original was about 6 individuals who met over the internet trying to get along with each other while gaining relationships with their Bakugan. And the new one is about Dan Kuso, and his friends making videos. I guess it's alright for what it is. But the other reboot is even worse. They're not even toy figures anymore. Like in the anime, the cool thing about having Bakugan and collecting them was you got the figures you'd see in the show. But now they are not even little toy figures anymore. They don't roll up into a ball anymore. They're just always monsters now. They are always big. I don't get it. Why does Drago look like that? Finally did it. I got the brand new Bakugan Stadium. Arena, it says. It says arena right there. This is a really cool toy. It comes with an exclusive Dragonoid, an exclusive special attack Dragonoid. This is my special attack Dragonoid. It was a Target exclusive that came with the special attack Nilius. Look! Look, here it is! Here's the Dragonoid it comes with! There we go. Okay, my phone doesn't want to focus, so you're just going to have to deal with the blurriness. So this is the Dragonoid that I already had. This one is the one that I just got. Do you see the difference? Let's get to work. Long story short, the stadium wouldn't assemble with my phone recording the whole thing, so it was impossible for me to record any of the footage because it wouldn't work while I was recording. How strange. So anyway, there's still more parts that refuse to attach to the thing. And since I have no friends, I can't really show you how they look like in action,
because I only have 2 hands, but I will show you what the cards would look like. But they're never face down when you actually play the game for some reason. You gotta have them face up. They face up like so. And, yeah, but, you know, you could roll them too. That's an option. Here, the cards stay in place, and, there's this for some reason. And this. And this is where you hold your Bakugan. Or this is where you hold your Bakugan. Who knows? And you do have this to, again, you're supposed to hold something there, but I think these go here so it can hold the cards. But again, nothing I do works! I'm kind of annoyed of how the new toys look. They don't even look like Bakugan anymore. During the Bakugan Battle Planet season, like I said, the toys were alright. But Champions of Vestroia? Don't get me started on this. This was the worst game ever. The first couple of video games were actually good, but this game had bugs and glitches. The side quests were so repetitive. The gameplay was the worst thing ever. I only played it because, well, the reason I got this arena. I'm a Bakugan fan. The video game sucked. The new toy sucks. The reason I stick around is because just because Bakugan isn't the same as it used to be doesn't mean I have to stop collecting or loving it. Also, keep in mind it was the 2000s. Of course, now it's going to be different. But like I said, the original show was about 6 friends who met online. They formed a team. They formed relationships with the Bakugan to fight against the evil Bakugan. It was a pretty cool story. It gave us a reason to keep watching, to find out more about the Bakugan and why they're here. What seemed like an innocent kids game became a rabbit hole of mysteries and secrets, and I think that's what the show was going for. But in the end, they'll always be the Bakugan Battle Brawlers.
What are you gonna do